Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I drop my kid off at school and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, listeners. It is a brusque, chilly Friday morning here in suburban Chicago, and I am making my third attempt to record this episode. I don't know whether it's a problem with my phone or a problem with one or both of my microphones or a combination thereof. So I'm engaged in a bit of technical support for myself. Today I'm testing recording using the microphone I normally keep at home. I've sidelined the microphone that I normally keep in my work bag because I'm now 0 for 2 in terms of successfully recording this episode while I walk home from the train. Thus, this is my third attempt, and if the idiom holds, the third time is the charm. At least that's what we hope. So, with that technical babble out of the way, I'm happy to present to you this week's episode of Board Game Sommelier. For those of you new to the podcast, the Board Game Sommelier is a semi-regular feature I do here on Pick Up and Deliver, in which I choose, like a good wine steward at a restaurant, I choose a pairing of a game and another media text. So the idea is, if you have a general topic that you want to explore, I can give you a combination of things that will let you explore that topic from a variety of different ways. Consider it a little flight of tastes. At least that's what I do. So, our topic today, given that I originally tried to record this on Super Tuesday, 4 days ago, our topic today is elections. I have 4 subtopics picked out and a pairing for each of those subtopics that will let you think a little bit about elections. I chose this topic because the United States, we are going through an election cycle right now. We're in the midst of the primary season, which for the Republicans is not very exciting because, at least in the presidential race, their candidate is already chosen. And for the Democrats, it's been a year-long squabble that is culminated last Tuesday with being down to 2 people running. And we have a few elections left to go. Here in Illinois, we vote next Tuesday on the 10th. So I do get to have my vote matter for something, I guess. As often as not, after Super Tuesday, the primary has already kind of been decided. So we shall see what happens there. So, the way that the Board Game Sommelier works, I will offer up a subtopic under the umbrella of elections, and then I will talk with you a little bit about what I see going on in that subtopic, what you might get out of exploring it, and then I'll offer you a game and another media text to be paired with that game. So let's just jump right in. Given that it's an election, I thought I would start with voting. Voting is, of course, the cornerstone of a republic like ours, where we elect representatives who then go and vote on our behalf on elements. So I want to talk a little bit about voting and elections. The 2 texts, the first, the media text that I suggest, is Election, the Matthew Broderick, Reese Witherspoon comedy, dark comedy about a high school student council election that goes very dark. It's an interesting film, not uplifting or joyous, but funny in a dark way. And one of those films from the interregnum between the end of Matthew Broderick's sort of boyish good charm era and the beginning of his era as an elder statesman on the stage, basically when he got the pardon, the producers. So this is sort of in that middle ground, and it's a delicious dark movie. The game that I wanted to pair with that is a game that I haven't played yet, although if all things go as planned, I'll get to play it this weekend, and that's The King's Dilemma. The King's Dilemma is one of the new hotness games in which players are members of a council and they vie with other members of the council to get their preferences passed as different events come up. It has a legacy component. As you play, you put stickers on the board and you open new envelopes, and so over time the narrative changes and the characters evolve. You have several votes each game, and you can either vote or you can pass. If you pass, you get more power, which you can then use in later rounds to augment your vote. It's supposed to be pretty great. I can't wait to play it this weekend, but I thought it would make a nice addition or a nice counterpoint to election. So that's voting. Our second subject is corruption. I, of course, live in the Chicagoland area, which is sort of famous for its endemic corruption. We have several past governors in jail, for instance, and the Democratic machine has had a stranglehold on the local politics scene for 100 years or so. We sort of famously have voting scandals in which dead people voted and people vote multiple times, and I don't think that's such a problem anymore. I think there are different places that the corruption expresses itself, but we have a history of that here. The two texts that I thought I would point to as exemplars of this, you could, if you wanted to go serious, you could go Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, the Jimmy Stewart film, but I would suggest Chinatown. Chinatown is a noir movie. It's got a delicious murder mystery element to it, but at its heart, it's a film about the corruption of big business and local politics, and it's deliciously dark. It's also a classic, so you should have watched it. As a little bit of a warning, it was directed by Roman Polanski, who was later convicted of rape of a young girl, young teenager, and he fled the country and has had a warrant out for him ever since. So if that taints your view of the film, that's certainly understandable. That said, I watched it for a film class and I found it pretty incredible. So that's Chinatown, the film. Now, of course, one obvious pairing for that would be Chinatown the game. However, Chinatown the game is not really about corruption. It's a business game. Instead, I would say if you're going to play a game about corruption, Tammany Hall is your game of choice. Tammany Hall is a famous area control game in which you play ward bosses trying to win electoral power in turn of the 20th century New York. Tammany Hall was the name for a famous political machine there that was eventually brought down for its corrupt ways. But in the game, you are trying to recruit groups of ethnic populations to vote for you or for your candidate in the different wards of New York. So I haven't played this one either, but all the reviews I've read suggest it's pretty great. So that's Tammany Hall and the film Chinatown for corruption. Well, I hate to have this be the next subject, but as we think about politics in the world today, I would point to fascism as something we should think about. We've seen a rise of neo-Nazi groups and hate groups, and throughout the world we've elected a number of sort of aggressive strongmen as political leaders, including, I hate to admit, the current U.S. president. And so thinking about how fascism comes into play is not a terrible choice at this point in the world's political stage, and particularly in the U.S. political stage. With that regard, I would point to two texts about the rise of the Nazi Party. First, as a game, Secret Hitler. Secret Hitler is, of course, a sort of jokey party game, but the core conceit is that you are part of the Reichstag in the 1930s, before Germany has really fallen to fascism, but while it's on the rise. And one of the things that honestly sounds more interesting than it ends up being, but is still a neat idea, is the fact that each time a fascist law gets passed, the people in power get more power. So the president gets to do things, they get special bonuses they get whenever fascist laws are passed. This means that as the fascists become more powerful, so does the leadership. One of the ways for the liberal players to win, which is the game's name for the non-fascist team, is to assassinate Hitler. But in order to assassinate Hitler, you have to have a certain number of fascist laws passed first. The fascists, of course, are trying to get Hitler elected chancellor or pass a certain number of fascist laws. So, as social critique, the game is pretty blank. You can retheme it. I've played the Secret Voldemort version, and it feels the same. It's basically just a social deduction game with a certain amount of randomness and hidden roles. That said, the theme is, I think, worth talking about and does bring up these ideas, at least, into the conversation. As a pairing, I would suggest the fantastic book by Erik Larson, who's called The Devil in the Garden of the Devil. No, In the Garden of the Beasts. Larson is most well known for The Devil in the White City, which is about the serial killer H.H. Holmes and the Chicago World's Fair of 1893. But Devil in the Garden of the Beasts is a newer book he wrote about the last American ambassador to Germany before World War II. So he was there during the rise of the Nazi Party and documented what it was like in the city, in Berlin, from an outsider's perspective. But it's a really fascinating book, incredibly well written and really dark. I thought the beginning was a little hard to get into, but once I was past the first 30 or 40 pages, it really got intense and interesting. So if you're interested in the rise of fascism or the evolution of the Nazi Party at all, I can strongly recommend In the Garden of the Beasts, coupled with a game of Secret Hitler, perhaps. So these have been pretty dark. Even my just general commentary on voting has been like, and here's how it's bad, or here's a dark comedy to watch about voting. So I wanted to end on a positive note. So my fourth theme to introduce in the Board Game Sommelier episode today is hope. Now, I'm an inveterate optimist. I think that the potential for human achievement through politics is very strong. And I think overall, we're making more progress than we're losing, even in this time of what I would consider regressive political movement. That said, I would point to two texts that I feel like engage with this idea, hopefully. First is a film. I would suggest the Kevin Kline comedy Dave. Dave is about a man who works as a body double for the president. He looks just like the president. And then he's recruited to be the president once the president falls into a coma, because the president's handlers don't like the vice president. So they want to maintain the president's government as long as they can. So they have Dave pretend to be the president. Of course, Dave isn't the president, and he in fact has much different views. So there's some comedy there. It's a great movie, very heartwarming, really thoughtful, and definitely something that I would love to see in place. I'd love to see or hear that people watch, because it's hopeful and wonderful. So that's Dave. Finding a board game that felt that way was much harder. Ultimately, I decided that one of the places that has always been a source of optimism and hope is in planning, particularly city planning. So I decided to go with the up to 7-player drafting game Between Two Cities. So Between Two Cities is a city planning game. It's played with drafting, meaning each player is selecting tiles and placing those tiles. And its unique gimmick is that when you play, you literally play from between two cities. You and another player on each side of you are working on cities together. So each round you're going to take a tile and put it in one of the two cities. And the game forces you to try to make each city as good as possible, because you win if your lower scoring city is the highest scoring city of anyone's lower scoring cities. So your goal is to make both your cities as good as you can, because your lower scoring city is your scoring. It's a delightful game, plays in less than half an hour most of the time. It's fun to play, easy to teach, looks lovely. That's Between Two Cities. They did a reskin of it called Between Two Castles of Mad King Ludwig, which I haven't tried. Now you may find yourself wondering, Brendan, you left out some really essential election games, in particular 1960, The Making of a President. I did leave that out, in part because I couldn't think of a good pairing for it. First of all, it's just generally about elections. And there are lots of books about elections, of course, and films. But most of the films are either comedies or really dark. And I think 1960 is an interesting bit of history, and I just didn't have a good book to go with it. So there's my challenge to you. Dear listeners, hop over to our Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and let me know what pairings you would offer under the subject of election. Particularly, what should we read or watch or listen to while we play 1960, The Making of a President? Well, I hope to hear from you soon. Thanks for joining me on the walk today, and assuming my microphone stayed plugged in, I look forward to publishing this episode. Thanks for joining me. I hope your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.